Welcome to the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast.
Hello everyone, this is Jarvis S. Scott with What's Happening Birmingham. Today I have the honor and pleasure of having attorney Kristin Sullivan of Waters Sullivan, LLC. And I want to bring her on the podcast today to talk about wills, estates, the probate process in Alabama. As we get into 2025, I know a lot of you all have New Year's resolutions, and sometimes New Year's resolutions go from either losing weight or picking up a new hobby or just getting around to doing things that you really need to do. And some of you all probably have thought about a will or heard about these whole things about trusts and estates. So I want to bring on someone that does it every day, pretty much. So the first thing I want to kick off is, how you doing today, Kristin?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, great. Yeah. So just a little quick bio about yourself. Tell the viewers.
Sure. So I am born and raised here in the Birmingham area, and we have a small firm downtown Birmingham, Waters Sullivan, as you said, and our firm specializes in anything having to do with estates and trusts. So we do estate planning. We also do, we handle probate once somebody passed away, and then we also handle any sort of estate and trust litigation.
Okay, and when as you were speaking, that two things come to my mind is that in life you can never plan your entry, because that's not up to us, but you can plan your exit.
That's true.
And a lot of times, you got two options when someone passed away. Either and I want to kind of walk through the two scenarios first. What happens if someone passes away without a will?
So,
in Alabama.
Right, yes. And so for anything that we talk about, obviously I'm only speaking about Alabama law, and laws vary greatly from state to state. But in Alabama, if you pass away, quote unquote, without a will, I tell my clients all the time, there's no such thing as not having a will. If you do not have a will, you do have a default will. It is what the law of the state of Alabama says is going to happen to your assets. So if you pass away without a will, there are laws that govern where everything, who's going to get what, where everything is going to go. It usually has to go through the court. You have to do things like somebody's going to have to post a bond. It's a more expensive and time-consuming process when you die without a will.
So give me a scenario when someone passes away with a will. Okay.
So with a will, you still a lot of times do have to go through the process with the court, but it is easier, it's less expensive, and you really have the opportunity to dictate what you want to happen.
Okay.
So for example, if you want your church to get some of the money from your estate, or if you want a friend or a charitable organization, you can outline all of those things.
Okay, so I'm going to go right back to, I like to almost call it organized chaos. When someone passes away, two things you can't take with you. Your money, your property, and unfortunately your bills.
That's right.
What happens in those situations?
Yeah, so regarding your bills, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about what happens with your bills and who's responsible for paying those. But really, when we take on some sort of debt or obligation, we are the only people responsible for that. And that is true even in death. So once you've passed away, the only place that money can come from is your estate itself. Okay. For example, if I have a credit card that, I've got a balance on and I pass away, the only way that credit card company can get paid is they've got to file a claim against my estate, and that money has to come out of some assets that I owned, my bank account or from the sale of my house or something like that. Your family members, and I feel like this is that common misconception, your family members are not responsible for that. So, for example, my executor of my estate, they don't have to come out of pocket to pay that. My parents or other family members, they are not having to pay that. Your spouse is not responsible for paying your bills after you've died.
Okay, and I guess before we go a little bit even further, I want to kind of give the viewers a quick bio about yourself.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm born and raised here in Birmingham. I went to the University of Alabama. And so I have a degree in political science from the University of Alabama. And then I went through to law school there as well. And then, because, I'm one of those nerds that likes school, I guess, I went back after that and got my LLM, which is a master's in law, specializing in taxation, so that with a focus on estate planning. And so went back and got that so that I could better serve my clients in the estate planning aspect of things and make sure that if there are estate tax issues that we can, properly advise our clients on those. And so that we can really address all of the aspects of estate planning.
Okay, so I'm glad I went back that now. When I read somewhere in the state of Alabama, it's called, I guess we'll say, going back to a person they don't have a will. Is there like a line of succession, like the direct heir line?
That's right, yes.
And I apologize if I get this wrong. Is it the spouse, then the children, then the parents, then the cousins?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So yes, like I said earlier, if you die without a will, the state essentially says this is what's going to happen to your things, to your money, your accounts, that sort of thing. And you're exactly right. So the first person it's going to go to is your spouse, then your children. Sometimes spouse and children at the same time if your spouse is not the parent of your children or of all of your children. So your spouse, your children, and then if you do not have a spouse and you do not have children, then yes, it goes up to your parents, and then to your siblings, nieces and nephews, kind of goes out from there.
All right, I'm going to throw a little wrench into the situation. Let's say I'm married to somebody, but we're separated. And I leave this earth. Is the spouse... So I want everybody to know that now.
So my number one rule is you need to either be married or not be married, right? And so if you don't want to be married, you don't need to be married because separation does not change what the law is here, which is that your spouse is entitled to part of your estate, even if you have a will. Even if you have a will that says, I'm separated, I don't want my spouse to get anything, it doesn't matter. They are still entitled to a portion of your estate.
Oh, wow. And I guess another way I'm going to throw another flip into this situation as well is, let's just say if someone passed away and there's two wills out there. I know you've had situations where people have, I call it, it's something like, because you all know I'm a notary, they call it, because I do a lot of notaries in the hospital, and they call it the bedside marriage or something.
Yes, again, so if there are two wills, we're going to look at the most recent one. So by operation of law, if you sign a new will, it revokes any prior will. So if you have two competing wills, the most recent one is the one that we're going to look at and we're going to ask the court to recognize. And that bedside marriage thing, again, you're either married or you're not married. It's kind of like pregnancy. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant, right? You're married or you're not married under the laws of the state of Alabama. And so if you get married a day before you die, you are still married at the time of your death and your spouse still has all of those rights under Alabama law. Now, we can get into some of the more complex things there, where was this a valid marriage? Was the person in their right mind? A lot of those where you've got somebody in the hospital, were they on a bunch of medication? Did they understand what they were doing entering into that marriage? That's a different question, but a marriage is a marriage.
Oh, wow. And I guess that alludes to my question as always, when's the best time to get a will? Of course, as long as you're breathing, it's the best time to get the will. What's the best time so it doesn't stand this, like you said, this scrutiny when it gets to probate court?
Sure. Yeah, the best time to get a will is now. I think, I strongly believe if you are 18 or over, you need to have a will in place. Now, did I have a will when I was 18? I did not, but I didn't know then what I know now. Every adult needs a will. Certainly, what we hate is having to get involved, and I mean, happy to do it always, but hate having to get involved where we are talking about a life and death situation and we're having to go to the hospital. It's a lot more difficult to make those sorts of decisions when this is really impending, when you know that you have very limited time left on this earth, it's a little bit more difficult. So when you're healthy, if you're able to, then certainly we would encourage you to get a will as soon as you can.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the actual document. So nowadays, we got these certain online sites where you'd be like, well, instead of me having to pay, thousands of dollars to a lawyer, I can just print it off the internet. What can go wrong in those situations?
How much time do you have? The number of things that can go wrong it's just really innumerable. Okay. I hate to put it this way, but we do estate planning, and like I said, we do the litigation. So we do when families are arguing about things afterward. I make a lot more money off of that. So if you do a bad will, I'm going to make a lot more money in the long run. So it doesn't really benefit me, but my obligation is to look out for my clients. And so I want everybody to have a good legally binding will that is not going to cause, these sorts of fights and court battles with your family members. What can go wrong? All sorts of things. A will is a technical legal document. And a lot of times what I see is people, they do this will themselves, and then maybe there's competing language. So then you've got to have the court resolve that. Or they don't really fully understand the repercussions of what goes into the will. They leave money to a child, a minor child. That's going to cost a lot more money and a lot more time in the long run, because we don't need to leave money outright to a child in a will. But most importantly, really, I try to use all those services. Whenever I see a new one pop up, I go through, I put in my information. I do the work so y'all don't have to. I put in my information and try to create a document from that. Not once have I found one that is legally compliant with our execution requirements here in Alabama, the document execution. So, that is going to cause your family a lot more time. They're going to have to spend a lot more money kind of cleaning that up and fixing it.
Oh, wow. And, and you can't fix it where you're going.
That's right. That's right.
And it goes, what's the average? I'm trying to take my personal experience, because I can tell everybody I was a notary, so I've dealt with some of these situations. How long, when it's disputed, typically it can last in probate court?
It can last years and years. We have some cases in our office now that have been going on for 4 or 5 years. And I've had, dealt with issues that have gone on longer than that, certainly. If it is disputed, it is going to add many, many months, if not years, onto that process.
So, and then going back to my personal experience as well, is that if it's not properly notarized too, that could get thrown out as well. Because if the notary doesn't keep proper books on it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's one of the big problems that I see with the online wills is that, maybe it provides for a notary or a witness, but it doesn't have all of the language and the requirements that we have under law here to make sure that is what we call a self-proving will. So that on its face, it is effective and it's going to be recognized by the court.
Now, let's get to I like to go to the TikTok, the fad now is everybody want to set up a trust.
That's right, yep.
So what actually is a trust, and how does that differ from a will?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It's definitely a fad. I've seen a lot of that, and we field a lot of questions about that. And the thing is, a trust is a great tool. I have drafted hundreds, if not thousands, of trusts, and I think they're really important in certain situations. Not everyone needs a trust. Everyone needs a will. Some people also need a trust. So a trust can do many things, and there are as many family situations that you have. There are an equal number of trusts. So the great thing about it is it can be really customizable. So it can really reflect your family's dynamics, your family's values, what you want for your children or your spouse after you're gone. It can help with tax planning, things like that. But the most common thing that the TikTok trend, I think that you're referring to, that we see is that people want to use it to avoid probate. And that's a really popular reason for using a trust. It's a perfectly fine reason. Here in Alabama, we have a much more favorable probate process than they have in a lot of states. It's not particularly difficult. It is not particularly expensive or time consuming. certainly can be, like you said, when something's contested. But it's a pretty straightforward process. And a lot of times, the cost of implementing a trust to avoid that process is going to exceed the savings on the back end. Again, why it's very important to talk to an attorney about that specific situation, because there are times that I go, absolutely, we need a trust. And sometimes a client comes in and says, you know, I think I need a trust. So-and-so down the street got one, or I saw it on TikTok. And we can kind of talk through and say, well, what are your goals? You know, why do you think that this is best for you? And then what is the actual best way for us to accomplish that?
Okay, and then, like you said, a lot of times people see a trust. Is it more favorable for people who have like multiple properties or businesses other than just individuals with the trust?
It certainly can be. I would say the most often use that we have for it is if there are minor children involved, because you want to make sure that those children are provided for and that there's not money being held up in a conservatorship or held up in the court for whatever reason, and that then they don't get a big check for that amount of money as soon as they turn 19, and they may not really be ready to manage that amount of money. So minor children is probably the most common usage that we have. But certainly if there are multiple properties, if you have multiple businesses, then you may want a trust, you may want a series of trusts. We may need to set up an LLC for some of this. It just sort of depends on the particulars.
Now, there are other things I've heard people do, like POD on the bank accounts, or they do quit claim the property. But sometimes I see from my personal experience that can get reversed to everybody. Depends on what state that person's in towards the end of their life. So, I guess, and how long you been practicing here in Alabama?
Almost 20 years.
20 years. So, any stories, situations, from, I don't call it battlefield, but just from the courtroom you've had to...
Oh yeah, I've got plenty. I could tell stories all day probably, but to address kind of the POD, quitclaim deeds, POD stands for payable on death, of course, and it can be a really useful tool, but it's not always the best tool, and I certainly wouldn't want that to be applicable to all of your accounts and all of your assets. Again, why it's really important to talk through each individual asset and make sure that they're addressed in the proper way. Again, talking about minor children, when we have PODs to a minor child, they can't actually receive that. And so it has to go through the court, causes a lot of problems. Quitclaim deeds, don't do this. This is not a great estate planning tool, right? Adding someone to your bank account as a co-owner, signing your property over to someone. Unfortunately, we see a lot of situations, talking about battlefield stories, where someone says, well, I went ahead and quitclaimed my property to my son, and now I want to sell it. Well, you can't do that. When you quitclaim your property, that is a deed. You are transferring ownership. You do not have any ownership interest or any say over it. Your son can then sell that property out from under you. He can mortgage that property. He can refuse to pay the taxes on it and kind of leave you high and dry. There are just countless examples of the ways that can go wrong. So I strongly advise against that. We see a lot of those, these sorts of homemade deeds and
homemade, got out there and then keep
that's right. That's right. And it's very rarely a good situation. We also run into issues with that when somebody then needs to go into a nursing home. So maybe they did that a couple of years ago. Now they need to go into a nursing home. We're applying for Medicaid, and Medicaid is going, wait, you gave your house away. So we're going to count that as an asset for their calculation purposes. And that's really, can be really harmful and really problematic to those folks.
Now, can you file the will in the probate court before you pass away, or whoever's the representative, they have to file after you pass away? Which?
The second. So here in Alabama, we do not file the wills before someone passes away. There is a law in place that says if you are the custodian of a will, meaning it's in your possession, then you have a legal responsibility to turn that will over to the court or to someone who will file it with the court within a reasonable amount of time after someone passes away. So It is up to either the executor or the family member to file that with the probate court after you die.
Yeah, that's important because I've seen like real conflicting on whether the person takes it down there and, just have to wait for a certain time. So if there's no dispute on it, what's almost kind of like, I know things can change. What's the normal process when there's no dispute sometimes on the will?
Yeah, so if there is a will and there is no dispute, then what we would want, if you come into our office, we're going to prepare the paperwork. There are 2 petitions that have to be filed. One is a petition for probative will, and the other one is a petition for what we call letters testamentary, which is essentially the order from the court that says this person is named as the executor of the will, and they are now given the rights to serve in that capacity. So we prepare and file those things. You file those with a death certificate. And if there is a will, we want everyone to sign off. So we want the family members, the heirs at law, that could be your spouse, children, parents, according to the statute that we talked about earlier, and anyone named in the will. We want them to sign off in agreement that, yes, this is a good will. We want this to be probated. And if you file all of that together, here in Jefferson County at least, the court immediately issues the order granting that. Some of the other counties in the state, it may take a few days, but it is a very easy, quick process if everyone agrees.
Okay, and then I guess get back to your other thing you got a master's in when it comes to the tax situation. Can you speak more on that?
Sure. So estate tax is something that sort of similar to the trust. I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people have this idea that the government's going to take all of your money, or when you die, they're going to take a large amount of it. Right now, the estate tax exemption is really, really high. It is about $14 million per person. If you're married, you each get that. So it is close to $30 million, meaning that if your assets are valued at less than that at the time of your death, you do not owe estate tax. And the state of Alabama does not have a state estate tax. So the federal estate tax is the only thing that we have to worry about here. And it just applies to a very, very small number of Alabamians right now. That is set to change within the next year. But from everything that we've heard from this administration and from Congress, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, because change. Trying to think anything else is what are some things, I know we covered a lot in the interview, what are some things that a person can start doing before they put the will together?
Sure.
Before they come see you.
So we try to make the process as easy and seamless as possible on the front end. We want you to call into our office, set up an appointment, and not have to do any preparation. But I will tell you some of the things that we talk about in that first meeting. So some things to kind of be thinking about, keep in mind. Number one, what are your assets? What are the accounts that you have? What sort of life insurance? Who are the beneficiaries on your retirement policy or your life insurance policy? If you've got an investment account, is there a beneficiary listed on that account? What type of account is it? All of those things are things that we're going to talk about in that first meeting. The other thing is, what do we want to happen to everything? What do you envision that being? Is it a situation where, especially if you have small children, people go, well, no, I'm not trying to give money to charity or anybody else. I need to make sure that my children are provided for. If that's not the case, do you want to give money to your church or to your college or university or whomever, whatever entity or another family member or something like that? Be thinking about that. What does that look like? It's a hard conversation to have with yourself. What do I want to happen when I die? But it is necessary. And then I think the final thing to start thinking about is who is going to play these important roles? So who do you trust? There aren't very many of us who have just an endless number of people in life that we would trust to handle our affairs, to handle our money. And so be thinking about who those important people are. Who would you trust to be the executor of your estate? Or an agent under a power of attorney who can do things like pay your bills if you're in the hospital. You know, who would you want to make medical decisions for you if you can't speak for yourself to your doctor? Those are all things that we go over in that first meeting, and so it's helpful to be thinking about those in advance.
Because I know a lot of times I can see definitely benefit, like single individual, but married individual be like, well, the spouse passed away and I don't have to go through the probate process because I was married and all that, but it still makes it, like you said, seamless.
Well, and to your earlier point about being able to kind of control what happens at the end of life, we also can't control when or how we exit this life, right? Yeah. And so to say, well, my spouse will handle it. Well, you and your spouse could pass away at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Or you could pass away and your spouse is not able to for whatever reason. Maybe they're having some health issues. Or they may pass away before you, in which case, obviously, you need to make some changes in your estate plan. But we have to think about and plan for and prepare for all of the worst case scenarios. And so that's part of the process. We call it ripping the Band-Aid off. We're going to think about all the worst things that can happen in life, and we're going to plan for and prepare for that so that you don't have to worry about it anymore. You know, and you can have that peace of mind.
Yeah, because I mean, I know people are sitting thinking about this. If you worry so much about the cost, and that's the biggest thing. People always be like, well, it costs too much. Same thing like life insurance. But you got to take the first step.
That's right.
Of doing it. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, of course.
I love your office. I wish you all could kind of see it. You have a very wonderful view of downtown Birmingham. Tell the viewers where you're located.
Sure. Well, and I want to say one thing about the cost. You know, I think that it's important to speak with an attorney about what that looks like. I think that a lot of people feel like it is cost prohibitive. There are lawyers and firms who, number one, will work with a wide variety of clients. We are always happy to try to tailor our plans to work within a budget. And I don't think it costs as much as people probably think it's going to cost. So just a note on that. We are located right here in the heart of downtown Birmingham. We're on the corner of 20th Street North and Morris Avenue. And so, yeah, we would love to talk to anyone who is looking to plan, their estate, make things easier for their family when they're gone, but also, questions or issues that arise after a loved one passes away. We are here for that as well.
Yeah, phone number, website?
Yeah, so our phone number is 205-855-5020. Again, I will say that 205-855-5020. You can find us online at watersullivan.com. And you can also email us at hello@watersullivan.com. So HELLO@watersullivan.com.
And one final question. This is an easy question. What do you like to do when you're not being an attorney? Hobbies.
Do lawyers have hobbies? Is that a thing? I love reading. I love going to listen to live music. I love going to eat at a new restaurant. So you can find me sitting at the bar having a new dinner at a new restaurant in Birmingham lots of nights of the week. Yeah.
All right. Well, Kristin, thank you for coming on. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to reach out to her, I got the contact information. Check out what'shappenedbirmingham.com for more interviews. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check me out. I'm on TikTok now, and the audio version of this on Apple Podcasts. Thank you all again, and think about getting a will, everybody. And don't wait. Do it today.
That's right.
Bye.
Thank you for watching the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast. Please check out our website, app, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest videos today.